Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Health Code podcast. I hope you're well, hope you've had a very nice weekend and had a good start to your week. Today's episode we're going to do something a little bit different. Now we did have a guest booked but they've pulled out at the last minute, so not leaving me enough time to book another guest in time for the episode today. So as a result, what I'm going to do is the opening part where I was going to talk about a certain subject, we're just going to talk a little bit longer about it, and that's going to make up this week's episode, which doesn't make it any less interesting, I hope, and doesn't make it any less informative. So today, what I wanted to talk about is this whole concept of the way you use language to describe health. So for example, the word diet, in my opinion, people associate with negativity. You associate it with deprivation, you associate it with not having something you want, and you don't associate it necessarily with a positive thing in the sense of it's going to be a fun thing to do. You associate it with a negative thing. You're going to have to give up the things you love. You're going to have to limit the things you like. You're going to have to do things and eat things you don't like, and so on. And it's become, diet's very much about the outcome. You want us to look a certain way, for example. You want to fit into a certain dress. You want a photo on holiday or at a wedding or whatever to look a certain way. It's not about the journey. And that's why diets are very often very short-term things. They're fad diets. They might last a certain period of time, a few weeks, if you're leading up to an event or something where you want to look a certain way or wear something, as I've just described. But it's not a long-term solution because they're generally something that you don't enjoy doing. They also have the word die in it for a start, which again has a negative connotation for obvious reasons. So I think when people talk about diet and what diet they need to eat, it's actually immediately switching people off because of the reasons I just mentioned. It's something that's associated with a negative thing. It's not going to be a fun thing to do. The journey is not going to be an enjoyable one. It's all about the outcome. Now, one thing that I've learned as I've got older in life is the journey is actually the best part. You need to love that process. If you're going to stick at something, if you're going to make something a long-term thing, you need to fall in love with the journey and the process of doing it. And quite often that journey and that process and that evolution is the most enjoyable part anyway. Because let's just take this for example. Somebody that has come from nothing and has built an incredible lifestyle for themselves, an incredible business, or has an incredible talent, or becomes a sports star or a songwriter or a musician, whatever, or an artist, that then gets fame and fortune and all of those things and luxuries that many people crave in life. They get that as a result of their efforts, versus somebody that maybe inherits billions of pounds and then has the same lifestyle but hasn't had to work for it. I guarantee the one that's worked for it is happier in 9 times out of 10, because that journey, that goal, that thing to aim towards, that thing to work towards, that then when you get there, you know that all that hard work and all that effort and all those sacrifices that you made were leading somewhere and were getting you to the end that you desired, versus somebody who's just had something handed to them and they've not had to put that effort in, that blood, sweat and tears. I would say that's incredibly unfulfilling. And as a result, why do so many trust fund kids and people that were in the entertainment industries very, very young and had everything you wanted very, very young, they struggle a lot with their mental health. They struggle a lot to maintain that sort of level of fame if they're coming from the entertainment industries. And people that, inherit these fortunes generally struggle with drugs, with scandals and so many different things because they haven't been, in my opinion, fulfilled because they haven't had to work to get there. Now, ultimately, to bring that back to health, what we should be aspiring to is to create a lifestyle. Now, that's what I would use to describe making changes to your health, particularly your eating habits. I wouldn't use the word diet. I'd use the word lifestyle, because for one, diet only explains and only allows you to talk about one aspect of health, which is your food, which is of course a major factor. However, there's so many other factors that contribute to your health on top of just what you eat. Lifestyle encompasses all of those, and we'll dive into what those different parts are in a second. But the reason I would use the word lifestyle is because ultimately what we should aspire to is to create something that is sustainable, is to create something that we can do day in, day out, week in, week out, year on year, because that's how you get somewhere with your health. If you go on a perfect diet for a month and then go straight back to the poor diet that you were living on previously for the next 11 months of the year, you're not going to be healthy. You're much better, for example, to come up with a lifestyle that's 7 out of 10 all year round, or certainly as an average across the year, than you are to come up with a lifestyle that might be 10 out of 10 for 4 weeks while you're preparing for your holiday or your event that you want to look a certain way for, and then go down to 3 out of 10 for the remaining 11 months of the year. Ultimately, you're going to do more damage than good. And as I said, with a diet, you're going to do something for a limited period of time, and then you're going to go back to a certain way. So you might lose a load of weight, but then you're going to put it all back on, because what you've created is something that's very short term. It's very difficult. It's very challenging. And as a result, you're going to do it for a finite period of time. You can't do that for very long before it's going to start to have a detrimental impact on your health, or you're going to put all that weight back on. And on top of that, obviously for those prolonged periods of time when you're not on that diet, you're living a lifestyle that's not very good for your health. So what we're trying to create, or what we should aspire to create, is something that's sustainable, something that we can do week in, week out. And maybe that means not going to the complete extremes that some people do. You know, I struggle with that. I take my health incredibly seriously. I really watch what I eat. I train every single day, but I've struggled at times when I've set myself an aspiration that is far too unsustainable for a prolonged period of time. Like if I think back to a couple of years ago when I was training for a boxing fight, which I didn't end up doing in the end because I ended up getting quite ill towards the end of it, and having a few weird episodes with my heart where I thought I had heart issues, which I didn't. It was actually stress related, but it was a bit of a wake up call. But anyway, I was getting up, I was running or going to the gym at like 4:45, 5 a.m. for 2 hours. I'd then come into Iconic and I'd do my day job. I'd then go to the gym in the evening and do boxing work from about 5:30, 6 p.m. for 3 hours. I'd then go home, sleep, and then do it again the next day. I was doing that 5 days a week, and also doing a long run on a Saturday morning and having a rest on a Sunday, while trying to be a husband, while trying to be a dad to 2 boys, while trying to run the business. And it was unsustainable. Now, I was meant to do that for 8 weeks leading up to that fight, and I got to 6 weeks into it, and my body had enough. My brain had enough. I was fried, and I was really struggling. And like I say, I actually was sat in the main office here, the other side of the door behind me, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I actually took myself to A&E at Burton Hospital and ended up strapped up to an ECG, and the doctors were quite concerned when they saw me because I was so pale and really didn't look great, because I'd created a situation that was unsustainable. And as a result, I don't do that now. I manage my life much, much better in terms of that. So train once a day rather than twice. If I didn't have a job that was incredibly busy as well, maybe I could do it twice, but I do, and therefore I can't. So you've created a situation where it's sustainable rather than unsustainable, like a diet or an extreme diet, for example. Like if you're limiting your calories to say 1,000 calories a day to get into a certain outfit, or 1,500 calories, let's say, that's not sustainable for a prolonged period of time. You're going to feel hungry, you're going to be moody, you're going to be grumpy, and you're going to rebel. And when you rebel, you're probably going to go even further into the negative aspects than you were before because you feel deprived. That's just human mindset. That's just the way that it is. So ultimately, like I say, we want to create a lifestyle that's sustainable, and we want to create something that we can do day in, day out, week in, week out. That's where removing the word diet and replacing it with the word lifestyle comes in. So if you've got your list of foods that you like, ultimately, the best thing you can do is by starting to find more healthy ways to consume those foods that you like. You can break those foods that you like into certain categories of what's good for you, what's probably neutral, and what's not so good for you. Have more of the what's good, a little bit of in the middle, and limit what's not so good for you. And do things like that on a more rigid scale. So what I mean by that is, rather than having an impulsive attack on the treat cupboard or an impulsive takeaway, schedule things in. You know what? I've set myself a target for the next couple of weeks. I'm going to focus on eating really good natural foods and whole foods. I'm going to exercise every day, whether that's a walk, whether that's going to the gym, whatever it might be, a little home workout. You don't have to set yourself something extreme that you're not going to do. Like, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week, an hour every time. Some people, that's not possible. And for some people starting from a standing start, I actually wouldn't advise that. It's a case of just doing something, because something is always better than nothing. And then say, you know what, if I do that for 7 days, on a Sunday night, I'm going to treat myself to a pizza from the takeaway. and you do that, you achieve that, and you reward yourself with that at the end of it. I have no issue with that. I think that's how we should be doing. I think you should set yourself targets and aspirations, and you should allow yourself little breaks, but do it in a way that is sustainable, rather than, I've had a stressful day Tuesday, I'm home, I'm ordering a curry, sod it. Well, if you do that, you're going to completely fall off the wagon. You're going to probably feel worse about yourself, and you're going to feel worse Wednesday morning, and you're going to then probably go to an over extreme to try and correct what you think is the mistake you've made the night before. So by creating something that's more planned out, it's more thought out, where you get the opportunity to have the foods that you like, I think you're going to stick to that, and you're also going to see progress, because those two things are very, very important. If you're doing something that you think is difficult or that you think is limiting what you love, and you're not seeing any progress, you're going to quit very, very quickly. If you're seeing progress, fantastic, but you also need to give yourselves those opportunities to have the things that you really like, but on a limited scale, and when you have set aside times to have it. So a good example is with myself with alcohol. I don't really drink anymore. I might drink a couple of times a month. I might have a glass of wine or two. Or if I've got something booked in, like a few weeks ago, me and Gareth went to the Lake District and we had a few beers and did, a good sort of 15 miles a day of hiking around the lakes. That's great. I enjoyed it, and I have no negativity or regret about having a few drinks, because I'd set it aside. If I'd have come home and, gone home tonight after doing this show and sat and had a bottle of wine, I'd be really disappointed in myself, because I hadn't set that aside. That would be on top of what I'd already said I was going to be able to do. So I would see that as a negative. That would be an impulsive one. So for me, I would say that having a bit of a structure to that will help, but nothing to the extreme that you would call a fad diet, because if you do that, you're just going to rebel against it. So as I said, the reason I would use the word lifestyle is one for that, and the other reason is that lifestyle encompasses all the different factors that contribute towards your health. Now, I see tons and tons of online so-called health influencers who intertwine health and fitness. Now, they can be intertwined, but they don't have to be. And what I mean by that is, so much of the fitness industry contains some of the worst things you could possibly put into your body, through synthetic proteins, pre-workouts, post-workout mixes, all the various different protein pancakes and pizza bases and smoothie bases and so on, that are full of so many different toxic chemicals, so many different seed oils, so many sweeteners and artificial ingredients. That's got no positive impact on your health. You might look great, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy. They are not necessarily the same thing in any way, shape or form. So I would suggest that when you're looking at people to listen to online, you've got to look at people who look at the whole aspect that contributes to your health, the whole body, in a sense, all those different factors. So diet is, of course, a massive one. Most people will eat 3 times a day. So 3 times a day, plus the drink that you're taking in as well. You're making a decision whether you're doing something for the benefit or for the detriment of your body. You're making that decision every single day. So, of course, that multiple times a day. So, of course, that's really important that you get that right. Exercise is, of course, very, very important. The way that you move your body, the way that you keep your muscles trained, the way that you keep your cardiovascular health, your lung health and so on, the way that you keep your body moving, your circulatory system, your nervous system, all those things, that's very, very important as well. Again, it's not the sole factor, because you go to the gym and you do an hour weight session, or you go and do a 10k run and then you come home and have a McDonald's. Well, that's not great. So you need to make sure that you are intertwining and you are coupling exercise and diet with other factors. So exercise is also an interesting one, because there's extremes on all sides of that. So exercise doesn't mean necessarily going to the gym 5 times a week, 2 hours a time. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean running every day. It means doing something. So whatever, exercise you enjoy. So you hear the phrase a lot, what's the best workout? And one of the common answers is the one you're actually going to do. And that's really true. If you love playing badminton, for example, well, go and do that. Go and do that a couple of times a week. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great exercise. You're moving, you're using your joints. It's great. If you like playing football, well, join a 5-a-side team. If you like running, go running. If you like going to the gym, go to the gym. If you like dancing, go to dance classes. Do something that moves your body, do something that gets you out of breath, that gets you a good sweat on, that encourages your muscles and your bones to move and twist and keep them supple and keep them trained. You don't have to do one rigid thing where it involves, a really intense HIIT workout that's going to leave you, blowing and red-faced. That's not necessarily what it needs to be. If you're somebody, of which there is many, that is intimidated by a gym environment, for example, perhaps you don't enjoy them, you find them, quite aggressive places, which some can be, you don't have to do that. If the idea of a Pilates class intimidates you because there's other people there and they might be watching, well, you can do things like that online from home. There's always a solution if you want one. That's the point I will always make. To most things in life, there is always a solution if you want one. And you've got to find what works for you. And that's where, to go back to diets are generally quite vague. They're generally quite one size fits all. You need to do something and find something that is specific to you and that works for you, for your lifestyle, for the time you have, for the space you might have at home, for the people you have in your life, for the body shape you have, for the injuries that you may have or have had over the years, your food preferences, your allergies, all those different things. You need to find something that is specific and personalized and tailored to you and your body and what makes you feel good about yourself and feel good in your body in terms of having energy and cognitive awareness and so on. So for me, exercise is a big area where people fall short because they look at these fitness influencers and they look at these routines and videos online and think, I'm never going to be able to do that. Well, you don't necessarily have to do that. Just getting up in the morning, for example, rather than picking up your phone and scrolling through social media, get up and drink a pint of water. Immediately there, you've made a really good positive start to the day. Get out, put some shoes on, and get out and do a walk for 30 minutes. Get 2,000-3,000 steps in. Right, again, you've made a really positive start to your day. Whereas you could have got up, you could have sat in bed, you could have put your phone in front of your face and you could have scrolled through social media, seen a load of doom and gloom or people living their best lives on social media and felt really bad about yourself. You could have skulked into the shower, had 2 or 3 coffees and then gone to work or sat down behind the desk for the rest of the day or whatever it is that you do for work. Whereas you can get up and do something positive for yourself immediately. That's a decision that is entirely within your thought process. You decide that. No one decides that for you. You don't need anybody else to wake up in the morning and not touch your phone and to have a drink of water and to get up and do some kind of exercise. So I would suggest that finding a routine that works for you with your lifestyle is very important. Don't look necessarily online at what other people are doing and think, I have to copy that exactly. Might do, and that might work for you. That person you see might be exactly what you need to do or are able to do, but it might not. And don't get disheartened and disengaged by that just because that might not fit for you. Something else will. So other factors that contribute to what you would call a healthy lifestyle: the relationships you have. You very rarely see anybody in the online world of health talking about relationships and the impact they have on you. And I'm talking about all forms of relationships, whether that be relationships with your children, whether that be relationships with your partner, whether that be relationships with your work colleagues, whether that be relationships with your family and your friends, of course. Because you can be getting up in the morning, you can be exercising, you can be drinking your pint of water, you can be leaving your phone alone, you can have a fantastic diet, you can be training in the gym every day as well. But if you're in an environment where you have a toxic relationship with your partner, where you're arguing all the time, you're at each other's throats all the time, nothing you do is good enough, then that's not going to be a conducive environment for health. Of course it's not. You're going to be stressed all the time. You're going to be overwhelmed all the time. You're going to be driving home from work with the dread and fear of what you're going to walk into. You're going to wake up in the morning on the back of an argument the night before with that pit in your stomach. You're going to be going to bed on an argument with all those negative emotions that are going to obviously impact your central nervous system, impact your cortisol levels, and so on. So that's obviously a huge factor. The relationship you have with your children. The relationship you have with your children as a parent can be incredibly empowering, can be incredibly invigorating if you have a great relationship with them. It can make you get up in the morning with a real spring in your step of getting up and going and facing the day because you want to provide for them. Equally, it can make you feel drained, it can make you feel worthless, it can make you feel insignificant if you have a poor relationship with them. So relationships are a big factor. Relationships you have with your family. If you have overhanging problems from years ago that have never been discussed, that you're constantly concerned about, or that constantly come into your mind and regret and fear, If you have the same issues with your friends that you don't feel you can be your true self around for whatever reason. Or again, there's unsaid and unresolved conflict from previous occasions. All of those things are going to be conducive to creating a negative environment, and that's going to negatively impact your health. I said on Trending earlier this week about how we can learn a lot from children because children live in the moment. It's one of the key areas we can learn a lot from, in my opinion. Adults are not. Most adults are either regretful of things that have happened already, or they are fearful of things that have not yet happened. They're either living in the past or they're living in the future. Very few adults, in my opinion, actually live in the present and are completely at peace and at home in the moment that they are in. They are thinking about what has not happened and, playing around these scenarios in their head, usually of which are all negative about what may happen in the future, or they are talking about things they have done in the past that they may do differently if they had the opportunity again, or how if I'd done that differently, I wouldn't be sat where I am right now. Well, you are sat where you are right now. Now, there's a difference between acknowledging and accepting that if I had that opportunity again, maybe I'd have reacted slightly differently. That's growth as a person. That's evolving. When someone cuts you up at the lights and you shout and lose your temper, and you sit a few hours later and go, you know what, I overreacted. If that happens to me again, I'm just going to sort of put my hand up and say whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. That's evolution. That's a natural growth as a person. That's acknowledging something that didn't work, changing it and doing it differently in the future. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the negative emotions of looking back at the past with such regret and blaming the past for where you are today. When you were in that moment in the past, when you were doing whatever you were doing, which has impacted what you think has happened today, you probably weren't thinking about the moment. You were probably thinking about something even further back that happened that led you to that moment. Where does it end? Where does it end? We can all look in the mirror and say that if we had our lives again, there would be a number of different things we would probably do differently. But as long as where you are today is something that was within your control and something that you can build on, or it's something that you're happy with, or at least the foundations of which you're happy with, then how do you know if life was different previously you wouldn't have got there? So start from today, because today is the only thing you can influence. The future, you can't influence the future by thinking about it too much today. You can influence it with your actions today. Absolutely, you can influence it with your actions today. But by worrying so much about something in the future that you don't actually do anything because you're too scared about what might happen, that's influencing it negatively or not at all, because you're not actually changing anything. You're just, the inevitable will happen because you don't make any active, decision to make a change. So relationships, I would say, are a huge, huge factor in people's health, of course. They're the three keys that I would describe, I think. Your relationships and the environment that you surround yourself in, whether that be at work. Again, if you're at work and you're in a job that you absolutely despise, for a boss you absolutely hate, or you've got work colleagues that you can't stand being around, and you maybe are belittled, you're not appreciated, you're on less money than you think you should be on, you're taken for granted, all of those things that are feeding into that negative emotional cycle where you feel, you feel very insignificant, you feel low, you feel invisible, and you don't feel fulfilled. Obviously, that's not going to be beneficial to your health in any way, shape or form. So relationships, whether they be, as I said, workplace, whether they be intimate relationships, whether they be relationships with your friends or your family, diet or your food habits are a massive factor. Exercise is another huge factor. And then the final one I want to touch on, which I think is very appropriate now, is your spiritual health or your consciousness health. Now, many people will argue, probably not viewers of this podcast, but many people will argue that that's just, hippie jargon, that's woo-woo, that's just out there. I don't want to talk about that. What's that got to do with health? Well, your thoughts, obviously, directly impact your chemical structure within the body, directly impact your emotional and hormonal responses within the body, which impact your organs, your feelings, your energy levels. All of those things are impacted by your thoughts. Hence how a negative thought releases negative hormones, which are pumped around the body, which then releases certain enzymes, which then leads you probably to have another negative emotion. It's like a cycle. We all know when you're happy, when you're laughing, when you're smiling, when something great's going on, you feel 10 times better within your body. You feel like you have more energy. You feel like you have more vibrancy. When you feel negative, when you feel down, when you feel tired, when you feel dour, your body feels incredibly tired. Your body feels incredibly sluggish. So it's very clear that your thoughts do impact how you feel. They impact your health. And there's so many examples you could apply to that. You go into a situation with a positive attitude, like it's going to go well, you'll go in there and have a much better experience than if you go into something expecting to fail. That's just human psychology 101. I think most people wouldn't argue with that. However, the further impact that those thoughts have on your health is something that I don't think is addressed anywhere near as much as it should be. We've seen mental health become a bit of a buzz term, but my question immediately is, what's your lifestyle like? What are you eating? What are you exercising? What are your relationships like with people around you? What's your job environment like? All of those, what's your home environment like? What stresses are you under? All of those questions I'd ask when someone says they have mental health issues, because I don't think necessarily a tablet is the solution. Because if you have a problem, the problem is caused by something. The job should be to unpack and unpick whatever that problem is and therefore try and remove it, and thus you fix the problem. You know, if you put a tennis ball in your exhaust, for example, you don't necessarily need a new exhaust. You might just need to remove the tennis ball and the car will run fine. Same sort of principle. If you put a problem or some kind of catalyzing event into a human life that then leads to people feeling insignificant, leads to mental health issues, depression and so on, you don't necessarily need some kind of chemical concoction, some kind of tablet, some kind of antidepressant that's made by the pharmaceutical companies making a killing off of this industry, because that's what it is to them. It's an industry. You don't necessarily need that in order to solve this problem. You probably just need to look at what's changed between me feeling fine and me feeling the way I do. What factors are in play in that situation? Was it a breakup? Did I lose my job? Did I lose a ton of money? Did a relative pass away? Did I start eating a load of crap? Did I stop exercising? How many different things could contribute to that? But I don't feel people look at that enough. They want this one. It's this whole idea of a quick fix. They want this tablet. There you go. Everything's fine. They don't want to necessarily do the work to unpick and unpack what the problem is. And it's like I said right at the top of this about diet being a short-term solution. Antidepressants are a short-term solution. Solving the problem is the only solution that is actually sustainable and long-term will keep you in a position where you get yourself back on the straight and narrow and you stay there. In the same way that the only way you will have a good physique, the only way you will have optimum health all year round is if you make this a lifestyle. You're not going to achieve that through a short-term fix that then you do for a bit and then you go back and do what you were doing before. You're not going to achieve that. So with your spiritual health, I want people to think more about the thoughts they are having. Because if those thoughts are detrimental, they're negative, that's going to have a negative impact on your health, of course. And it's also going to have a snowball effect on other things. If you're feeling rubbish about yourself, why bother eating well? I feel like crap. Why bother eating well? At least I have something to smile about if I get myself a takeaway. Why bother going to the gym? You know, what a waste of time. I feel rubbish. You know, why bother investing in my relationships and friendships? Because I feel crap. It's a negative snowball effect. It's a cycle. And one can lead to two, can lead to three, can lead to four. And all of a sudden, all those factors I've talked about that contribute to your wellness, all of a sudden, all of them are out of kilter. So it's very important that all of them are looked at. You know, you can have one of those factors taken care of. You can have one of them under wraps. But if you don't have them all, or at least working to have them all, you're not going to achieve optimum health, in my opinion. And the other aspect of spiritual health, which I think many people don't think about, is the connection to whatever the hell we're doing here. Because, you know, really from birth, we're given two options. We're given religion and we are given mainstream science. Both of which, in terms of mindset, are incredibly limiting. They're incredibly small-minded in terms of how they encourage your thinking. You either look up and there's a God and they decide everything and they judge everything and, you know, you live your life a certain way, or, you know, you'll make God angry. Or alternatively, mainstream science, and then you go in the ground, and that's the end. Both of which I think tie into a really negative mindset of feeling small, of feeling insignificant, of feeling like you don't matter. I would suggest that that's one of the huge contributing factors to why people live their lives in a state of fear most of the time, why people live their lives in a state of feeling very insignificant, as I just said. Because we are clearly part of something much bigger. And when you see yourself as that, when you see yourself as infinite consciousness and, there is eternal life and that this is one experience of many, all of a sudden that fear of what's next, that fear of death, that fear of making a mistake, that fear of failing disappears into the wilderness because it doesn't matter. You have so many opportunities to get it, you have another opportunity coming along down the line. So therefore, if you mess up one, why does it matter? So I don't mean that in a negative way that, just go off and do whatever you want and who cares about the consequences. But what I mean is, if you believe that you are small, if you believe that you are limited, if you believe that you have no power, that's encouraging you to think small. That's encouraging you to think very with a limited attitude. That's encouraging you to believe you have no power. So you're not going to have any. You're going to live a very small-minded life. You're going to live a very limited life. You live a life with very little power, which is, I suggest, how most people live. They live in a state of fear, reliant on others, waiting for their government to announce whatever they're going to announce, waiting for their boss to tell them whatever they're going to tell them, rather than living in a state where they take control of their life. They live in a state where they are empowered, stand up for what they believe to be right, and take the initiative. Now, on this particular subject of health, taking the initiative is the key, because most people, when it comes to their health, in my opinion, they wait until there's a problem to go to their doctors. They wait until there's a problem to start looking into their health, whether that be a symptom, whether that be a diagnosis, whatever it is. They wait till there's a problem. Whereas if you take the initiative and you come from an empowered state where you take control of your health and you say, actually, you know what, my job is to make sure there ain't a problem, or to prolong for as long as possible before there is a problem, and by doing that I'm going to make X, Y and Z choices. That's how we take down the mainstream medical system, because the mainstream medical system, and you can add the food industries alongside that as well, they have built into their very industry our sickness. Their entire system is based on profit, and the profits come from treating people who are sick. So what is their incentive for people to be healthy? The simple answer is there isn't one. It's a cycle. Governments allow the food industries to get away with anything. The food industries put out products that contain numerous ingredients that they know are harmful to health, and in fact are making it more and more difficult to have ingredients in them that are positive for human health. As a result of that, diseases, sickness, illnesses, symptoms increase, and then the medical industry comes in with their carefully planned solution for the problems that have been created by the other industries that they work intertwined with. It's a really simple cycle. And it's a cycle that will continue until we break it. You see people online talk about solutions and ask for solutions to the problems that we face as a human race across the planet. And the easiest one is the one I'm describing here. We know that system, that structure, that circle I've just described is one of the key components to bring in this control system that is well on the way. Because if you have an empowered, healthy, fit, vibrant, mentally tough population who have self-respect, who don't accept things that don't feel right to them, who put their health at the top of their list of priorities and take care of their families, and say no to your toxic foods, say no to your toxic medical products. Do you want to try and control people that think like that? Or do you want to control people who are dumbed down, have low testosterone, have full of toxic chemicals on however many different medications because of their chronic diseases caused by the very foods I'm describing? They sound a lot easier to control, manipulate, undermine, and belittle than the first one I've just described. That's why they attack us so blatantly. There is a war on human health. Of course there is. It's been for a long time, but it's now becoming more obvious and more aggressive. And that's why health, in my opinion, should be the number one priority, because it's the easiest place to start. You don't need mass civil obedience and a mass protest to stop buying seed oils, to stop buying highly refined carbohydrates, to stop eating processed sugar, to put down your phone, to get out there and do some exercise, to reconcile with your family, with your partner, with your loved ones, with your children, to ask those questions about what life might be about, to ask those questions about what might we be doing here, what might be next. You don't need anyone. You don't need any money. You don't need any mass coordinated effort. You just need the decision to do it. You just need that conversation with the person that you see in the mirror and decide to do it. That's why it's the most important place. It doesn't need anyone but you. And I know that's scary, and I know that might seem daunting and intimidating. But on the flip side, it's incredibly empowering. Because rather than being sat going, oh, what are we going to do? We need these people. We need more people to see it. You don't. You just need yourself. And then you become a walking, talking billboard for that lifestyle. We all know when you see people that you haven't seen for a bit that look great, that are clearly doing something different. It's noticeable. It's obvious. People ask, what have you done? What have you done with your hair? You've lost loads of weight. You're looking great. What's your routine? People are interested. You walk down the street and you see somebody that looks happy, that looks vibrant. You see a couple. You see a family by the swimming pool on holiday that appear to have it all together. You see it. You notice it. You can't not. You can become that if you decide to take control. If you decide to take the first step and you decide to put yourself at the top of the list of priorities in terms of taking back power and control over your health and those of the people that are in your circle, whether that be your family, for example. It doesn't need anybody else. It doesn't need large swathes of donations. It doesn't need large swathes of organisation. It just needs you. And that's ultimately really what it's all about. And you can apply that argument to pretty much anything. It all has to start with you. No one's coming to save us. No orange-faced billionaires coming to save us. It's got to start with you. The food regulation industry, they're not going to help. They're not going to regulate and stop these toxic foods. The medical institutions are not going to all of a sudden go, you know what, you were right. They're not. They're not. We need to make them obsolete. And by doing the things I'm describing, we can absolutely do that. 100%. We can make them obsolete. Rather than trying to change these systems from within, just make them derelict. These companies that we prop up by spending our money there, these companies that we prop up by giving away our power to them, stop doing that and they don't exist. We don't need to go in and change it from the inside. We need to create a parallel system that just doesn't need them. That's the answer. And that's the only solution, in my opinion. Well, I hope you found this, I don't know what you call it really, rant, presentation, mumbo jumbo jargon, whatever you want to call it. I hope you found it interesting and thoughtful and have some ideas to take away from it. Please comment on the episode with any questions or anything that you'd like me to cover, or any further things you might want me to elaborate on slightly that we've discussed in this episode. And if you're interested in talking with me directly, then I'm happy to help advise on things like nutrition, on exercise and so on. That's of course part of it. I love it. I do it every single day. So I'm really happy to advise if anyone needs any help and support. I'm not plugging. I'll just, send me what you're up to and I'll help out as much as I can. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in tonight, whether you watch on YouTube, Spotify, or on iconic.com. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's episode, and we'll be back again next week where we'll be taking on more health-related topics and speaking to more empowering guests. Until then, good health, and I'll see you soon.